EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, March 13th, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, David McWilliams will be with us to talk about William McKinley and why Trump is so obsessed with him. And later in the show, Lily Greenberg Call, former Biden administration staffer who resigned over his Gaza policy, joins us to talk about the wildly unconstitutional detention of Mahmoud Khalil. Also on the program, keep calling your senators. Chuck Schumer publicly says Democrats will reject the continuing resolution that allows Elon to keep illegally cutting the funding that they're supposed to be appropriating.
Usurping their power.
Yeah, signing off on their own death warrant. You can't even get Democrats to fully agree not to do that. But many are skeptical that this may be a stunt by Schumer, that he might be doing a head fake. So don't let up. 202-224-3121. Call your senators. It's in their hands now. Today is the deadline for agencies to submit mass layoff plans to DOJ. This comes as Trump doubles down on his desire to end the Department of Education, but 21 Democratic attorneys general sue in response. After the EU announced a 50% tariff on U.S. whiskey, retaliating against Trump, Trump's retaliating with more percentage. 200% tariff he proposes on European alcohol. You think that, like, rich people are going to be thrilled when their French wines are 4 times the price?
Remember when the wall was going to get higher every time Mexico said something?
And Mexico was supposed to pay for it. The stock market keeps falling after Trump's tariff threats. But Republicans argue no pain, no gain. Meaning pain for you, gain for them. Trump withdraws his nomination for RFK's buddy, anti-vaxxer. Don't have his name down, actually. But he was going to be CDC director. Looks like he didn't have the votes. The mayor of Miami threatens to close a local movie theater for screening the Oscar-winning Israeli-Palestinian documentary No Other Land.
Hysteria.
Zionists are 21st century McCarthyites, folks. Tim Walz announces that he will go around the country to red districts, speaking to Trump voters about progressive policy. He is that guy. A UN independent inquiry finds that Israel has committed genocidal acts against Palestinians by systemically targeting women's health facilities and using sexual violence. Trump's envoy arrives in Moscow to discuss the 30-day ceasefire that Ukraine has agreed to. And lastly, Trump replaces the chief IRS counsel with a Doge sycophant. All this and more on today's Majority Report, also known as EmMajority Report. And it is just myself and Matt today. Bradley is out, so forgive us if, we have a little lag time between clips. Matt has to kind of roll around in his rolly chair from computer to computer. Say hello, Matt, if you can.
Hello,
if you can. Hello. But honestly, this is really key right now. Continue to call your senators. I'm going to say the number again. 202-224-3121 is the number. Chuck Schumer may be doing this just as a bit of theater. And AOC on social media just this morning was kind of indicating that that could be the case, saying that there's the potential for a head fake for a failed proposal for a 30-day continuing resolution, which is what the Democrats are saying, so that they can say, well, we tried, we'll vote to invoke cloture on the GOP spending bill that basically leaves a bunch of blank space for Elon Musk to fill it in with his Doge cuts. It says nothing about addressing the fact that an unelected billionaire is illegally cutting the funds that are supposed to be appropriated that they're discussing in this bill. How can you not put that into place? And how could Democrats vote for it in that instance? John Fetterman's already said he's going to do it. But the point is like the House Democrats, they stood together. Chuck Schumer, get your caucus in order. Make sure they don't get to 60 votes. So again, call your senators, 202-224-3121. Matt, go ahead.
I'd just like to say the founding fathers in their infinite wisdom, which I'm never sort of problematizing or contradicting, actually created the Department of Governmental Efficiency at the start. It was supposed to be called Congress.
Right.
And if you look up like what Harry Truman was doing as a senator before he was president, it was called the Truman Committee, which would go around like contractors during World War II and be like, hey, those are bad engines, or we're getting a bad deal. It wasn't led by a contractor like Elon Musk. It was into contractors, where that's where the fraud goes, whether it is in the military or in health services or stuff like that. And we have the foxes looking into the hen house for fraud right now.
Yep.
And the way that any sort of Democrat could say, well, we just need to be the responsible one. You're being responsible by giving a budget to the foxes.
Yeah. And the Fetterman, whatever, he's a lost cause, just completely out to lunch. But there are 10 senators who are being cited here as undecided. Gallego of Arizona, Angus King, independent, but caucuses with the Democrats. Mark Kelly of Arizona, who's trying to do the centrist thing. Ben Ray Lujan, Brian Schatz, Tammy Baldwin, Lisa B.R. What does that stand for? Senator, Blunt Rochester, okay. Who is the senator from Delaware, which is insane. Brian Schatz, Tammy Baldwin, Andy Kim from my old home state of New Jersey. What the hell are you doing? John Ossoff is assessing the situation, and then Tina Smith. So those are the 10 Democrats that need to be targeted right now, and that is Haley Talbot of CNN, who has that tracker going on right now.
And once again, that is 202-224-3121.
Thank you, Matt. With that, this was a pretty startling admission on CNN last night. Caitlin Collins had Senator Markwayne Mullin on, you know, the guy that tried to have a fist fight with Sean O'Brien in the Senate, and Bernie had to break it up.
Kind of won O'Brien's respect a little bit.
Right.
I won't get into that right now.
I mean, well, and now Sean O'Brien's all like loving the Republicans, so I guess that's water under the bridge. But he's here on CNN, and Caitlin Collins asked him about Donald Trump's tariffs. And no problem. He makes an admission here that I just don't think any other Republicans have said so far, but it's absolutely the case. So he lets slip what the real function of Trump's insane tariff war is.
It's promises made and promises kept by the president.
Well, but the businesses seem confused. I mean, Wall Street, we're watching. I mean, you're seeing the numbers.
Sure.
What's a business leader left to think, or an investor?
It's tough right now, and I understand that. I'm a business owner. We all make decisions based on two things: the way we're raised and our life experience. Before politics, all I ever did was business. You need certainty, which is why we need, tax policy that's permanent, not that's able to fade in and out. I'm not trying to get off on that subject, but I'm just saying that we need certainty in the business world. Tariffs is a tax, and it will be passed on consumers, but it also allows us to have open markets. So if you want to have open markets and access to other markets, so let's go past Canada and let's go past Mexico and start talking about the rest of the countries we allow to come in here, that the president says we want to have reciprocal taxes on you. If you're going to or tariffs on you, if you're going to charge us 36%, we're going to charge you 36%. If you want to charge us zero, we'll charge you zero. Every one of these countries want access to the strongest and greatest economy in the world. That's the United States. We don't necessarily have to have their market, but if they're going to have access to us, we want access to their market.
What you just said is important, that a tariff is a tax and it is passed on to consumers.
Of course it is. Everybody knows that.
That is something the White House does not acknowledge.
No, that is something that the president, who is a business person, understands that completely. No one understands the economy better than this president. There hasn't been a president that understands this economy better than this president.
Can you pause it? I'm sorry, just for a quick second, and go back to when she says, you just revealed that, because the White House is not revealing it. And you see he gets nervous and just starts to compliment Donald Trump over the top, right? You know, he admitted what he's not supposed to admit, that the tariffs are a compounding regressive tax on the American people instead of raising taxes on the wealthy to justify further tax cuts on the wealthy.
And greatest economy in the world, that's the United States. We don't necessarily have to have their market, but if they're going to have access to us, we want access to their market.
What you just said is important, that a tariff is a tax and it is passed on to consumers.
Of course it is. Everybody knows that.
That is something the White House does not acknowledge.
No, that is something that the president, who is a business person, understands that completely. No one understands the economy better than this president. There hasn't been a president that understands this economy better than this president.
And I think you'd agree that in part of why he won re-election was because of his promises on the economy. There's a new CNN poll today out that says Americans are not that impressed with how he's handled it so far. It's 56% majority of the public disapproves. That's actually lower. It's a higher disapproval than it ever was during his first term in office.
It's still higher than it ever was with Biden, though.
Well, but are we judging him just on Biden's numbers?
No, I'm just saying that if you're going to use numbers, you're using his high number in his first 4 years where we had inflation at 1.4%.
It's worse than it ever was during his first term in terms of how they're viewing it. But
sure, but he's got to recover from 4 years of Biden. Keep in mind, we had we were in a recession over Biden, but no one talked about it. Sorry, I'm sorry to say that.
They were asked how Trump is handling the economy over Biden. I mean, they were asked about the tariffs specifically, and they said they disapprove of that even by a wider margin, 61 to 39%.
President Trump will get this economy where it needs to go. He said that he was going to do what he's doing with the tariffs moving on. He said he's going to keep people from taking advantage of us. These countries have been taking advantage of us.
Okay. This is what happens when you elect a guy that basically operates as a glorified mafia boss to be the president of this country, because he has no fundamental understanding of how our trade relationships work with our partners in North America or in Europe, and how it is mutually beneficial in this more broad capitalist sense, right? If we want to talk about cutting into globalization and onshoring a lot of our manufacturing, I'm on board with that. But you know what sort of addressed that? Through a very kind of xenophobic lens, but still, the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act was about domestically manufacturing a lot of what we import from China and abroad so that we have a more resilient economy. And Donald Trump the other day says he wants to take a hammer to the CHIPS Act.
The point of tariffs and why we used them a lot when we were a developing economy hundreds of years ago, and why developing economies use them now, is to protect local industry so you can build it up there. I mean, I think Samsung in South Korea. I mean, South Korea is a big example. I'm not sure particularly if Samsung is, but these companies are basically state protected.
Yeah.
And there is a use. And again, look at China. It's very clear why Americans, and why it's sort of bipartisan, that we wanted to help the chip industry here in America, because a lot of them are being made in Taiwan. And look at a map, for instance, if a war broke out. So, but this is it. Tariffs are not done to raise money from other countries.
Well, when they are done in that way, and when it's being applied in this way, it really all it does is put that on the back of the American public.
Right. They have to be targeted toward a certain industry that you want to develop.
If you want to incentivize onshore manufacturing of X product, you slap a tariff on the import of that particular product so that the price is higher, and so the US-based company can compete. But broad tariffs, 25%, 50%, now he's saying 200% for European booze, that is just going to function as a regressive tax. The sales tax, as I've said a few times on the show, is already a regressive tax because it's a flat tax on those goods. And then if you are somebody who's a working family or a middle income family, the proportion of your disposable income that is spent with that sales tax percentage is higher than somebody who is wealthier. And so when you increase the price of goods to raise revenue as opposed to taxing the rich instead, that is a compounding regressive tax. That's how tariffs are going to function. What they don't want to address is that since the Reagan era, when he slashed the top marginal tax rate for people, from like 70% to around 50%, and then they kept cutting and cutting and cutting since that period, is that the reason that, say, our budget isn't in order or we have some of these deficits is because we completely cut off the most effective fundraising mechanism for the federal government, which is taxes and taxing the rich. So they don't want to do that. And a lot of Democrats, frankly, don't want to sign off on a bill that raises taxes on people who are also their donors.
Yeah, they're bought by the same people.
So
it's the representatives of rich people saying, we don't know where money is.
Right. So Trump is saying, we can go around that and I can do this unilaterally and make it so that everyday people bear this burden. And we're going to be talking about, the historical parallels with William McKinley with our next guest in just a second. But I do think that is a startling admission there, where
there'll be a little disturbance. But we're okay with that. It won't be much.
Yeah, I'm sure you are okay with that. To make tariffs a major source of federal revenue is to immiserate the average family. Period. And I do think at the end of the day, this is their effort to, it's a very far-right libertarian vision of we've already cut the income tax and slashed it since under Reagan in the ways that I just described. Yeah. How about we get rid of income tax altogether? Like in Florida.
Because what would actually really help manufacturing is massive infrastructure spending.
It would.
Things like that. We could do all this tariff stuff or whatever, but you could just make it so our trains weren't derailing and spilling stuff all over the place. Maybe make that more efficient, but whatever. What do I know?
Okay, before we get to our next guest, a word from some of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Zippix nicotine-infused toothpicks. Zippix bring you a totally satisfying, convenient, and great-tasting way to curb your nicotine cravings. Now you can get your nicotine fix anytime, anywhere, without having to rely on smoking or vaping. Zippix toothpicks give you an easier, better, and more discreet way to get your fix, and they are available in 6 great long-lasting flavors. They have options in 2 milligrams and 3 milligrams of nicotine. Zippix toothpicks are perfect for flights, sporting events, restaurants, and literally everywhere else that smoking and vaping are banned. They're one of the most cost-effective nicotine products on the market and are proudly in the USA. If you are not a nicotine user or you're trying to get away from your nicotine habit altogether, Zippix also offers caffeine and B12-infused toothpicks for a quick energy boost. Zippix have already helped hundreds of thousands of customers get their nicotine fix without needing to inhale smoke or vape oils. So what are you waiting for? Give your lungs a break and try Zippix nicotine-infused toothpicks. Ditch the cigarettes, ditch the vapes, and get some nicotine-infused toothpicks at zippixtoothpicks.com today. Get 10% off your first order by using the code Majority Report, one word, at checkout. Your lungs will be glad you did. Again, that's zippixtoothpicks.com, ZIPPIX toothpicks.com. Get 10% off your first order by using the code Majority Report at checkout. Must be 21 or older to order. Warning, nicotine is an addictive chemical. Zip more, smoke less with Zippix nicotine toothpicks. And lastly, going online without ExpressVPN is like closing the door when you use the not closing the door when you use the bathroom. But ExpressVPN is like closing the door and maybe locking that door. Even if you think you have nothing to hide, why give random creeps a chance to invade your privacy? I'd like to thank ExpressVPN for supporting the Majority Report, and here's the deal. Visit expressvpn.com/majority and you'll get an extra 4 months free. Because all your traffic flows through their servers, internet service providers, including mobile network providers, know every single website you visit. And in the United States, ISPs are legally allowed to sell that information to advertisers. That's what all these big tech guys are all about. But ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure encrypted servers so your ISP can't see your browser history. It hides your IP address, making it very difficult for third parties to track your online activity. It's easy to use. You just fire up the app and click one button to get protected. It works on all of your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, and more, so you can stay private on the go. There's optional dedicated IP service engineered with innovative zero knowledge design. Not even ExpressVPN can trace an IP address back to the user. For U.S. customers, it also comes with Identity Defender, a new suite of tools to get your data removed from data brokers, alert you when your data appears on the dark web, and even ensure that you against data theft for up to $1 million. It is ranked #1 by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. It's great if you want to, check out a show in a different location, but it's also important, like if you're going to do some work at a coffee shop and the Wi-Fi there, you have no idea who's on there and who has access to your information. ExpressVPN is essential for when you're on the go, but also to protect you when you're at home. Protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/majority. That's expressvpn.com/majority to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months free. expressvpn.com/majority. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be joined by David McWilliams. We are back, and I am thrilled to be joined by David McWilliams, economist, host of the David McWilliams podcast, and author of many books, including Money, A Story of Humanity, which is currently out in the UK and coming out in the US next week, David?
It is coming out in September, Emma,
in September.
The United States. Not for quite some time. The United States in September.
All right. Well, we'll have to have you back to discuss your book when it comes out here.
Love it. That would be great. It would be excellent. Listen, thanks for the invite and lovely to see you. And I hope all things are all going well over there in New York. And so greetings from Dublin.
Well, greetings from New York. Unfortunately, here in the United States, where Donald Trump is the president. And this is where I'm just thrilled to have you on, because people should really check out your podcast and listen to this full episode on Trump and his obsession with William McKinley and how many parallels there are with him and what he's borrowing from. But I guess let's just start with the presidency of William McKinley. What is he known for, and what was the historical context of the time when he came to power?
So William McKinley, the story starts in a little small village in Antrim, which is in the north of Ireland, Scots Ulster village, where William McKinley's father, Davy McKinley, was born and emigrated to the United States. McKinley fights in the Civil War, is a lawyer, is a Republican, tries to get on the Republican ticket. He's from Ohio. He's a Methodist. He's very religious. And up until around the 1870s, not really doing very much. But he becomes the president, and we'll talk about this, in 1896 in one of the most celebrated, contentious, and frankly very modern elections. This is the interesting thing, very modern election. It's the first election where you see, for example, big business, you see lobbying. It's the first election where you see a populist, a real deep populist against a classic conservatives McKinley. There's a culture war going on, and there's a massive economic war going on between the establishment elite and the working man. The working man in the United States having expanded dramatically in the previous 2 decades, as first the Irish arrived, then the Italians arrived, then the Jews arrived, all coming at the same time as the Germans and Scandinavians were coming. So you get this huge sort of cultural demographic maelstrom in the United States. And this, of course, the country is pushing out to the West. Now, the reason I found this fascinating was 2 things. One is, in the course of writing this book, although I'd known it beforehand, but I hadn't researched it properly, I alighted upon the fact that The Wizard of Oz may be the most fated movie in American history, in the sense that American families sit around, sing Over the Rainbow, Judy Garland, all that sort of stuff. I thought when I was a young fella that it was just a kid's story. But in actual fact, The Wizard of Oz is an allegory about William McKinley. Now, this is the fascinating thing. And William McKinley is the man that Donald Trump bases his presidency on. He has been asked if there is somebody in history that you mirror yourself and you imagine yourself to be, it is William McKinley. That is why I decided to do a wee bit of digging about McKinley, see what sort of character he was. So McKinley, his presidency is characterized by 4 similarities to Trump's. The first one is tariffs. He was called the Napoleon of tariffs. McKinley believes that tariffs are the way in which the United States would grow dramatically and muscularly, number 1. Number 2, it's the first election where you get the oligarchs against the people. So at the time, you had Rockefeller and JP Morgan supporting McKinley. This time around, you've got, Bezos, Elon Musk, all those sort of characters, right?
Our 21st century robber barons now.
Exactly. So it's exactly the same thing. Now, and then, of course, you have McKinley starts a number of small territorial wars of acquisition, kind of smells like Greenland, one in Panama, one in Cuba, one in the Philippines, one in Guam, and one in Hawaii. By the end of McKinley's reign, he has acquired these small territories and small wars, which is the first time since the American War of Independence that America has projected its power outside America. And then finally, his overall, despite these 4 small wars which you would regard in the American hinterland or these spheres of influence, he is isolationist, which is exactly what Trump wants to be. And he is basically very anti-European, which is precisely what Donald Trump is. So these sort of similarities are kind of knocking around in the back of my head. And then when you start to investigate, what you see are uncanny parallels between the potential operation of Trump Mark II and the operation of McKinley Mark I and then Mark II. And then the final similarity, or at least possible predictive power of McKinley, is the following. McKinley wins a second term. He gets assassinated in 1901. His vice president, his J.D. Vance, ironically, who everybody thought was going to go down the same oligarch route, his vice president is a man known to Americans as Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt gets into the White House, and what he does is he completely does a 180-degree turn, goes against the robber barons, goes against all the large steel companies, the railways, the electricity companies, breaks them all up, and turns America into a much more vibrant democracy. So in a way, what you have there is the conflict between MAGA and the tech bros playing out 100-odd years ago. So MAGA, and the Steve Bannon MAGA, and I suspect the Vance MAGA, is much more anti-big business. But the Trump version of which has been, in a way, co-opted by big business, because Donald Trump is impressed by big business. He's impressed by money guys. So very interesting period of 8 or 9 years of American history, and this is the fascinating things, all played out in The Wizard of Oz, where all the main characters, the Wizard of Oz is William McKinley. This is the amazing thing. And The Wizard of Oz was an allegory written about this class struggle, this culture war, this struggle for money, a very, very tedious subject for most people. For me, fascinating whether or not America should be on the gold standard or silver standard. Sounds very esoteric, but actually at the time it was fascinating. So there are amazing, Emma, similarities.
Yeah, I mean, the one part where the J.D. Vance thing, I think, can't be the complete parallel is that Peter Thiel and the tech oligarchs financed his whole political career. I mean, I really do think that there was an article that came out in Politico about how Elon Musk was the one of the many pushing Donald Trump to pick J.D. Vance. But perhaps we can have a Democrat populist come in afterwards and do what you described. Yeah. One can only hope.
The amazing thing is, Roosevelt was.
Yeah,
go on.
I want you to talk more about the gold standard and silver standard fight, because that's a fascinating piece of this history that we can learn from.
Yeah. So I think, Emma, the gold and silver standard, you've got to go back to Alexander Hamilton, who set up the dollar in 1792. And that was a silver dollar. And that silver dollar remained the currency of the United States until 1872, so nearly 100-odd years. And then in 1872, the United States Congress took this really momentous decision to abandon silver and go for gold. Now, the reason it did that, there's many reasons, one of which is that America wanted to be taken seriously by Europeans, and they were all on the gold standard. So America thought, well, we need to be a proper country and deal with gold like the rest of them. But the problem with gold is the following. Gold is more valuable than silver. So if you go on a gold standard, what you do in effect is you tie all your dollars to gold. That means, because it's more valuable than silver, you reduce the supply of dollars in the system. And what that does is two things. One, it leads to deflation, which is falling prices, number one. But number two, it profoundly enriches the people who hold gold. And surprise, surprise, who holds gold? The rich or the poor? The rich. So what you get is you get a system which is entirely based on creating a financial architecture that rewards very wealthy people.
Crypto.
And this is
crypto.
There you go. Crypto is even worse, because crypto is nothing more than a lobby group that has effectively taken over the treasury. Now that's terrifying for us, and we're not even Americans. So I can tell you about that stuff in a minute. But so the gold and silver standard is a wee bit like the crypto discussion, but the vast majority of Americans at the time are farmers. And the farmers' income comes from the land. And the land's income comes from the yields largely of wheat and corn in the Midwest, okay, and of cotton in the South. And the South is an interesting example because the South was, before the Civil War, the richest part of the United States. So much so that the currency that was issued by the Bank of Louisiana, coming from New Orleans, which was one of the most wealthy cities in the United States, was called the DIX, okay, DIX. And it was a $10 note. But the problem is that Louisiana was half French-speaking, half English-speaking at the time. The French speakers could pronounce X as dis, but the English speakers pronounce it as Dix. And that's where Dixieland comes from, and the Dixie Chicks, and the Dixie Democrats. So it's all about this currency, but that currency was a paper currency that was defaulted on after the Confederacy lost. So there was a huge drop in Southern wealth after the Confederacy lost the Civil War, and they were seething. And they didn't have any gold. Why? Because they'd spent all their gold trying to fight the war. And when they lost the war, nobody gave the money back to them. Whereas the Union side, who had also spent gold, the Union government gave them money back. So straight away, you see a flow of money to the northwest, east of the United States after the Civil War. Second issue is, as the railroads started to expand out into the Midwest, what happened, the farmers didn't realize this at the time, was that every single time a railroad went out like 100 miles, hundreds of thousands of hectares of arable land around the railroads came into production. And what does that do? It reduces dramatically the price of wheat. And what's the farmer's only income? It's wheat. So suddenly farmers, who are always in debt, because if you're a farmer, you earn money when you harvest, but you lose money when you sow, so you need money all the time. They end up in a weird situation where the price of the corn and the wheat, which is their income, is falling against gold all the time. So the more indebted they get, the more indebted they become. And you have this emergence of this amazing party called the Populist Party in the Midwest in the 1880s. That merges with the Democratic Party under a charismatic leader called William Jennings Bryan, and he fights against McKinley. And the politics of the 1896 election were the populists and the Democrats wanted to come off gold and go on to silver, and thereby allow more dollars be printed, and thereby relieve the suffering of the farmers in the Midwest and the South, whereas the more industrial North, the financiers, the bankers, the oligarchs wanted to stay with gold. And as a result, they backed their man, Mr. McKinley, to the hilt. So the politics of money is always never, of course it's America, is never far away from the underlying politics of the country.
Right. And just the fact that, I mean, you said this in that podcast episode that I really recommend, is that McKinley's election in this way really realigned the political map, because the Northerners went towards the Republican in the election because it was protecting their wealth. And there's another figure that is a parallel to one of the robber barons, but maybe the closest, Mark Hanna, McKinley's financial backer, who was very intimately involved in policy. Basically, that's why in The Wizard of Oz, as you describe, the depiction of Oz is like an amalgamation of both Hanna and McKinley. So who is this bagman pulling the strings behind the scenes?
So basically what you have is Hanna comes in, Mark Hanna. So McKinley is a Methodist, Northern Irish, Scots-Irish, as you guys call them. So too is Mark Hanna. They're both from Ohio. Hanna is an ultimate man behind the scenes. He is the operator. He's the Svengali. He's pulling all the strings. And that's why exactly the Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy eventually finds the wizard, is nothing more than this little guy behind it pulling strings, who stands for very, very little. Mark Hanna comes into McKinley's life in the 1880s. He finances him. He turns him around. He turns him from a loser, because McKinley had constantly been losing, local elections against a guy called Lynch in Ohio. But his fortunes change when he meets Hanna. Hanna, of course, is exactly the sort of guy you want behind you, a bagman if you decide that what you're going to do is you're going to become the agent of big business. So Hanna is an extraordinary character, and like all these characters, long forgotten, but he offers the blueprint for lobbying in the United States. So there's no lobbying before 1896. This is the amazing thing, right? The election of 1896 creates lobbying, which is something that Hanna understands completely, because he understands McKinley isn't half as good a speaker as Jennings Bryan. So he can't beat him out on the hustings. But if he can get all big business to come to McKinley, then big business will change the facts on the ground in their place, and they'll do it through money. So it's also the beginning of lobbying. And as you know, as Americans, lobbying has certainly made sure that your democracy is one of the finest democracies that money can buy.
Right, right. And that, I mean, the ushering in of that level of like almost like brazen moneyed interests behind a president. I mean, they just did a Tesla basically ad outside of the White House yesterday.
God. I mean, we saw it.
It's so eerie. And the way that he continually invokes McKinley means I think he's just like obsessed with him and really trying to kind of emulate him in a variety of different ways. And we'll get to the tariffs in a sec because that's the most obvious. But the imperialism that McKinley also engaged in is really important to understand. The taking of Hawaii, the occupation of Cuba after the Spanish-American War, the Philippines also conquered during that time and basically colonized by the United States. This echoes what he's trying. The Panama Canal under McKinley. That's why he's fixated on this. Greenland, you can see being kind of an extension of this, or Canada can be the Hawaii of what Trump is envisioning. He's so lost his mind at this point that I really think this is what he thinks is his calling, is to be McKinley 2.0.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's kind of bizarre, the similarities. McKinley understood one thing that all subsequent presidents have understood in the United States, which is that a small war galvanizes the population. And you can create all sorts of chaos. You can create and mask all sorts of kleptocracy with a little war. And so in the late 1890s, America goes to war against Spain over Cuba. And this is a colonial war. In the aftermath of that war, the Americans realized, look, we had a Pacific fleet and an Atlantic fleet. We were fighting a war against Spain in Florida, in effect. We need to bash a hole through this continent to make sure that our Navy on the West Coast and the East Coast can talk to each other. So they should have picked Nicaragua, by the way, which is the closest bit, but they picked Panama because it was a nice bit of corruption and money changed hands and all the good stuff. So when I look at Trump now, and again, I look from afar as an Irish citizen, but somebody who's been to America many, many times, what I see are not only uncanny parallels, but also, in a way, McKinley has given Trump the permission to behave as he does. Because all he's got to say is, look, I'm only doing what the other guy did 100 years ago. And isolationism is part of that. The kind of vehement and visceral anti-European angle in all this is part of that too. And again, as we said, the tariffs are what McKinley decided. The great thing about tariffs is you reduce income tax, but you actually tax your people through consumption. Yep. That's the bizarre thing.
It's a regressive sales tax, basically, in terms of how it functions, right? Especially in the broad way that he's applying them. Did McKinley apply tariffs in this broad way as well?
Yeah, so McKinley probably ended up having tariffs at around 50%. But remember, the United States was not half as integrated into the world economy then as it is now. The United States, basically, there was a battle between, if you really go back to American economic history, it's a massive battle between the Federalists under Alexander Hamilton and the Republicans. And this goes back to a row at the core of the Founding Fathers, which what sort of society should America be? And some of them, as we know, like Jefferson, wanted America to be this sort of rural idyll which is cut off from the rest of the world. And Hamilton wanted it to be a muscular power to compete with the Europeans. So that's always been at the backdrop of American political philosophy. Trump is introducing tariffs, as you know. The problem with introducing tariffs, if you introduce tariffs in a world of protectionism, you're kind of doing the same as everyone else, right? Which is what McKinley was doing. Right. But what Donald Trump is doing is introducing tariffs to his best friends, the Canadians, the Europeans, and we're frankly kind of shocked by the whole thing. It's kind of like, we're like, really? You're going to put tariffs on us? As opposed to people who might have been America's enemies. But yes, but tariffs, very, very blunt, very regressive. And of course, Emma, the key thing about tariffs is counter-cyclical reactions to tariffs. So, countries are not without their own sense of themselves. Institutions are not without their own sense of themselves. And what you're finding now is that we have a tariff war between Canada and America, a tariff war between Europe and America, and tariff wars, trade wars usually lead to capital wars. And they're usually a forerunner to other wars. So I think we're in very, very dangerous times. The one thing about McKinley is he didn't last long enough for this to happen.
Yeah, he was assassinated. Perhaps that's another thing, that there was an attempt on Trump, so he maybe sees him as a compatriot in that regard.
Yeah, but, maybe.
I mean, then I guess the globalization piece that Trump seems to be missing, just the fact that our economy is so interconnected, means that you can't necessarily do tariffs. I mean, not that they were, not that, I could defend the policy back in, 1897, but the idea that you could apply this now when I'm in favor of onshoring a lot of our manufacturing to make our economy more resilient. But the way that he's applying this, it's just nonsensical. And I can't see an end to this that doesn't lead to just price increases that will be so crippling that it's going to decimate millions of Americans.
Well, this is obviously the first time the Majority Report and Wall Street have been on the same side, Emma.
Right.
What you're finding is that the guys down in Wall Street down the road from you agree with you. They're basically saying, hold on a second. We are looking now at a vista of stagflation. So where the economy is slowing quite quickly as a result of the chaos coming out of the White House. Because, business, for example, Trump is interesting for our business, the media business, the commentary business, right? It creates churn, excitement, etc. But for fundamental businesses, non-service businesses, you need what they call transparency, visibility. You need to be able to forecast with some degree of certainty. That is not happening. It's very clear that American business is hoarding now. It's hoarding its own assets. It's hoarding its own money. It's not recycling because it doesn't know, like, will I invest in Ireland? Well, maybe not. The Irish Taoiseach was in Washington yesterday. What was the outcome? We're not that sure. Will I invest in Europe? Will I invest in Canada, or will I invest back here? But you know what? Back here, I'd like the economy to be growing. I'd like there to be a sense of security, all that sort of stuff. So it seems to me that this idea of smashing up everything, breaking it, and then trying to rebuild it, which can be the only intellectual framework you look at this about, is a highly, highly speculative approach to the society. Forget the economy, the society. But maybe speculation is what Donald Trump has been doing all his life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I guess lastly, before I let you go, David, can you speak? Can you speak a little bit about McKinley's role in exacerbating incoming wealth inequality prior to the Great Depression, and if there's a parallel here for Trump as well?
So basically, McKinley, his victory in 1896, like all political victories, rewarded his mates. So first of all, he kept the gold standard intact, which was not reversed until Teddy Roosevelt's nephew, FDR Roosevelt, in 1936. Ironically, the year afterwards, they started making the Wizard of Oz. And of course, the Wizard of Oz, the yellow brick road, is the gold standard. It's the yellow bricks going up to Oz, and OZ is the chemical symbol for gold. So it's all ties in together. And what you get in the United States in the period 1870 to 1914, which is the period that, or 1917, which is the period that Trump fetishizes, you get massive movement of people and capital, number one. But number two, you get a profound exacerbation of wealth inequalities. You'll know that's when another famous Irish-American, Scott Fitzgerald, wrote The Great Gatsby. It's called The Gilded Age for a reason. And the reason is the following, that you had this hyper-speculative aristocracy or oligarchy in the Northeast who were speculating with credit based on gold, which they had acquired. And you have an economy that's growing very, very rapidly. You have a huge amount of recently arrived immigrants in the northeastern cities who are in effect working for no minimum wage, just for the lowest possible denominator, because they're ethnic, they're different, they don't speak the language, it's taking them a generation or two to actually find their feet in the United States. So they are in no position to actually rise up or in any way to come together as a political party. But in Europe, you have the emergence of the labor movement, the Fabian movement. This, of course, is percolating down to America. And what you get by the beginning of the 1920s and well into the 1920s is a labor movement that is saying to its leaders, hold on a second, we would like some of the pie, please. And that leads, of course, as we know, to the emergence of the New Deal in the early 1930s, which in itself was, I think, propelled by the Great Depression, but would have come anyway. It would have come anyway. I don't think it came out of nowhere. I think it's a long cyclical process where it's this idea of the Overton window, where ideas which seem radical today become mainstream, and the ideas that were mainstream yesterday become redundant. And that's what I see happening all over the world. But as you said, McKinley, because he reframed the map of America, where the Northeast ironically became Republican and the rest of the place Democrat, quite different to what we are at the moment, he, for a 40-year period, this is the worrying thing, if you really want to take the parallel, for about a 40-year period between 1896 and let's say 1936, McKinleyism dominated the United States. And that was, in effect, an oligarchy which ruled through a culture war, through money, through position, through power, etc. And that, I presume, is the fear if you're an American citizen right now.
The parallels are very eerie, and again, there's a podcast episode on the David McWilliams podcast, which goes into this even more in depth. All of the parallels with the Wizard of Oz. People should check that out. Also, check out David's book, Money: A Story of Humanity. It's out in the UK, but coming out later this year in the United States. David McWilliams, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Emma, it was an absolute pleasure. We'll do it again.
We should. All right. Quick break. Yep. See you soon. Quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be speaking to Lily Greenberg Call. are back, and we are joined now by Lily Greenberg Call, former special assistant to the chief of staff at the Department of the Interior under the Biden administration. Lily resigned over Biden's support for the genocide in Gaza. Lily, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So of course, I wanted to have you on today to talk about the, and we can update the audience on one of the gravest crimes against our First Amendment perpetrated by our government, I don't know, that we've seen this century, the detention of Mahmoud Khalil over his activism opposing the genocide in Gaza at Columbia. And I wanted to first begin by getting your reaction as somebody who worked under a Democratic administration to two separate statements by Senate Democrats. The first is Chuck Schumer's statement, which begins by basically condemning Khalil. Do we have that, Matt? I sent that to you over DM, but I can start reading it here from my computer. So Chuck Schumer's statement begins, "I abhor many of the opinions and policies that Mahmoud Khalil holds and supports, and have made my criticism of the anti-Semitic actions at Columbia loudly known. Mr. Khalil's..." But so this is how he begins his statement, essentially, by falsely linking him to anti-Semitic actions without fully saying it, and abhorring his opinions as if this is what's important here, and as if he's saying anything controversial. And now let's compare this to Chris Murphy's statement, the senator from Connecticut, who I think is really stepping up to the plate in many ways here. We might not be aligned on every policy, but this is why Chris Murphy is my pick, really, for the next leader for the Senate Democrats. I'm throwing that out there here because this is somebody who understands how to fight Republicans in this era, and this is a much more appropriate way to react to this grave First Amendment violation.
A young man by the name of Mahmoud Khalil, an immigrant and a legal permanent resident of the United States, is being held right now in prison, even though no criminal charges have been filed against him. And I want to tell you why that should matter to every single American. Khalil is a recent graduate of Columbia University. He opposed Israel's military operation in Gaza. He has deep animus toward Israel's policies and the U.S. support for those policies. He helped organize the protests over Gaza at his university last year. You can disagree with his views or his politics, but there is no evidence he has broken any law. But last weekend, Trump officials entered his apartment and took him into custody. They brought him to a detention facility in New Jersey at first, but when his family went to visit him, he wasn't there. For a while, his family and his lawyer had no idea where he was. They eventually found out that he was being held in a detention facility in Louisiana, and that's where he still is today. In dictatorships, they call this practice being disappeared. No charges, no claims of criminal behavior. The White House doesn't claim he did anything criminal. He's in jail because of his political speech. And here's why everybody should care. In America, your political speech is protected, whether or not the president likes what you say. But today, if you're loyal to Donald Trump, your speech is going to be protected, even if it's hate speech. You can be Marco Ellis, an employee of Doge, who said he, quote, was racist before it was cool, and, quote, normalize Indian hate. And the vice president of the United States will tweet in your defense. But if you are disloyal to Trump, or you're organizing against Trump's political agenda, your speech could be criminalized. You could find yourself in jail. Now, Trump chose to begin by disappearing a Palestinian immigrant, hoping that his place of birth and his immigrant status would just cause people to look the other way. But we cannot, because
there's more to that statement, but I think that's a great piece of it. What a contrast. And Lily, just your reaction to seeing the different ways that powerful Democrats in our government are reacting.
I think Murphy's statement is excellent, and I think it is what Democrats need to be doing right now, right? They need to be unequivocal in calling this out for what it is, which is a politically motivated abduction of an activist for his speech, right? They should be pressing the Trump administration to release Mahmoud immediately, to halt this crackdown. And we need more Dems to be speaking out like Chris Murphy. It's a problem that people like Schumer and Jeffries are spending more time throat clearing about how they abhor Mahmoud's positions before saying that they believe in the First Amendment and how that applies to every single person in this country, regardless of if they like what they're saying or not.
And there is no evidence that Mahmoud said anything that would, I mean, not that it even would matter. He can say whatever he wants. He could have said deeply anti-Semitic things, and this would still be an illegal detention. But the reality is that we know that the Trump administration engages in anti-Semitism all the time. Just yesterday, Trump said that Chuck Schumer is no longer a Jew, he's Palestinian, which is something he's repeatedly said, but he hadn't gone the extra step to do what he basically was more explicit about this time, which is saying that he's a bad Jew. As if Donald Trump, who said there were many people, good people on both sides of the Charlottesville Nazi rally, as if he has any leg to stand on about anti-Semitism. Just your reaction. And I should say, Lily, you were the first, I believe, a Jewish staffer in the Biden administration to resign over his Gaza policy.
Yeah, I mean, first, just to address what you said before, too, like there is no evidence that Mahmoud Khalil has espoused support for Hamas. And I think it's so upsetting that any support for Palestinian human rights is equated to support for terrorism, right? I mean, and if we even want to go there, like there's a quote that's being spread around the Jewish community right now, actually, of Mahmoud saying, I think last spring, that Palestinian and Jewish liberation are connected, and that he deeply believes that. And I think that's, that it's just indicative of how, right, you're right. I mean, it doesn't quite matter. These people are not actually interested in protecting Jews. None of this is about protecting Jews. If anything, it's another way that they're weaponizing anti-Semitism to justify fascism. And it's placing our community as the face of Trump's fascist crackdown on speech that he doesn't like. The White House tweeting out Shalom Mahmoud over a picture of him does nothing to solve anti-Semitism. And if anything, it makes Jews less safe. It's going to breed resentment of Jews to take away people's rights in our name. It's a crackdown on free speech, and it's not about fighting anti-Semitism. And turning Palestinian into a slur, like Trump has done, is just, another clear attack on Palestinians and the movement for Palestinian human rights and freedom, and on any Jewish people or non-Jewish people who support that.
Can you react even more to what you just said about that tweet saying Shalom Mahmoud? I find the idea that this administration is invoking Judaism as they use, frankly, there was an article in Wired, by the way, that said that explained what they're using, the statute. They're using this INA piece of legislation. I'm trying to find the abbreviated version. I will in a second. But it was sponsored during the height of the McCarthy era by McCarthyites in the 50s. And it was also targeted against Jews. As we know, the Red Scare was also deeply anti-Semitic. So the fact that they're saying shalom that way and using Zionist state repression to equivocate that with Judaism, that's one of the most anti-Semitic things I've seen a government official openly engage in, and it was from the White House account.
Yeah, I mean, the whole story of Mahmoud was so. It's the stuff of nightmares, right? It's to be disappeared with no warrant, without access to lawyers, not telling his wife or lawyers where he is. And those are the stories that I grew up hearing as a young Jewish person from my ancestors and people in my community about what it was like for us as Jewish people to live under authoritarian regimes in the old country, right? People picked up at night, stolen from their families, their whereabouts unknown. So then to see that happen, and then to see something so abhorrent like that tweet, I mean, it's disgusting. It's so personally offending. And honestly, I think it's like a deep miscalculation in some ways by Trump and his Christian nationalist buddies, because a broad swath of American Jews are furious about this abduction, and they're furious about the way Trump is blaming this abduction on Jews. Of course, we're seeing progressive Jewish organizations speak out, but we're also seeing organizations like the Jewish Center for Public Affairs and mainstream rabbis at synagogues across the country, Jewish politicians, a Jewish Federation in Michigan, calling this out for what it is, which is a fascist crackdown on freedom of expression. And I think it's so, this has crossed such a line for so many people, and it's such a, it's just so clear that it's so anti-Semitic to blame, to justify the disappearance of a person and a complete violation of their First Amendment rights by saying, this is because we care about Jews and anti-Semitism. And again, taking away people's rights and taking away people's jobs and livelihoods, right, with this crackdown on the education system and everything that they're doing, and blaming it on Jews or claiming to do it on behalf of Jews is going to create resentment towards Jews, which is intentional, which is also what they want, because they would rather people blame Jews than blame them.
Right. Or question U.S. foreign policy. And so they're much more willing to drum up anti-Semitism for that purpose. Here is one of Mahmoud's lawyers who was on Democracy Now! This morning. His name is Ramzi Qasem. And Amy Goodman has a great question for him about that statute that's being used very flimsily by the Trump administration to detain Mahmoud. And he explains, the history of this piece of legislation and how it has previously been used even for explicitly anti-Semitic purposes.
With the Palestinian people.
The government is trying to deport Mahmoud based on a rarely used provision of federal immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to remove individuals whose presence it believes has potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States, unquote. Can you explain this extremely rare provision? The only previous time it was used before was in 1995, according to recent press reports. According to the New York Times, that was an attempt to deport a former Mexican government official. Ironically, the judge who struck it down as unconstitutional in 1996 was Marianne Trump Barry, President Trump's sister, who was a federal judge in New Jersey. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, so that provision has, an interesting history, to say the least. It's a provision that is now understood to have been enacted primarily to target Eastern European Jewish Holocaust survivors who came to the United States and were suspected, often wrongly suspected, of being Soviet agents. So that's the origin story of this particular piece of federal legislation. And that origin story is the reason why Congress came back in and amended it, saying, well, you can't use this law to punish people for their views and their speech. And if you want to do that, then it requires, a personal certification by the Secretary of State for why that person's presence and their speech poses a compelling risk to U.S. foreign policy interests. And it also requires the Secretary of State to notify Congress with supporting evidence for why they're making this move. So it is an exceedingly rarely used provision. And it certainly does not trump the Constitution and Mr. Khalil's First Amendment rights.
So, just a fascinating piece of context. And you see how, well, first of all, Donald Trump being a student of Roy Cohn, who was somebody who pushed for the execution of the Rosenbergs in the Red Scare, which was also anti-Semitic. Cohn was, trying to I guess he was very anti-Semitic despite his background. I'm very anti-gay despite being gay. Anyway, but you can see how the targeting of specific groups under the guise of cracking down on communists or leftists, or in this instance, I mean, the modern Zionist crackdown is a McCarthyite one. History is really rhyming here, and they're using anti-Semitism to justify it in this instance, while also drumming up anti-Semitism.
Exactly, which is actually a real manifestation of how anti-Semitism happens historically. It is usually a part of this cycle of both using it and blaming Jews, but also drumming up using Jews as kind of a cover for the ruling class's actions. And I think this is really why American Jews need to be making sure that our synagogues and our federations and our Hillels and all of our Jewish institutions are speaking out unequivocally against this. We need to be fighting for Mahmoud as if he is one of our own, because he is one of our own. And we as Jews know where this kind of thing leads. And we cannot allow that to happen here in the United States, because this is a test case, right? This is they're testing how much they can get away with this, right? As Chris Murphy said, and as I said before, they abducted someone who they think politicians and the public will not have a lot of sympathy for and will look away. And they're not going to stop there, right? They're going to go after anyone who advocates for anything that the MAGA regime is against, for reproductive justice, for climate action, for migrant justice. We need to make sure that the regime loses. And American Jews, I believe, my community needs to be on the forefront of that, of fighting that.
And lastly, Lily, how would you recommend folks get involved here in terms of just what are the paths for activists who don't just want to free Mahmoud, but want to kind of be a bulwark against the very authoritarian actions that this administration is going to engage in, the ones that you describe?
I mean, people need to be in the streets, right? I think there's been some really wonderful actions right now, and clear, like people taking to the streets in New York and DC, and I know in Louisiana outside of the detention center where Mahmoud is being held. But both people in power and regular everyday Americans need to be showing up. This isn't a time to think, oh, someone else is going to go, right? It needs to be you, and you need to bring your community and your kids and your neighbors, and particularly right within, I was saying within the American Jewish community, we need to make sure that our institutions are speaking out against this, but I think that applies to other people and other communities as well. And this is really clear, right? Like, you don't have to agree with what someone is saying to understand that such an explicit violation of our First Amendment rights is an attack on all of us. And if we don't fight back, then we're not going to have much to fight for.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Lily Greenberg Call. Lily resigned from the Department of the Interior under Biden over his support for the genocide in Gaza. Thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emma. Take care.
Take care. All right, with that, folks, we are going to wrap up the free part of this program and head into the fun half, which you can access if you become a member when you go to jointhemajorityreport.com. It helps us stay afloat. We don't know what the future looks like with the big tech overlords and the platforms that we rely on to finance our program. So any way that you can do to make us a little bit more resilient, and becoming a member where you can IM the show, and we'll read your IM on air, most likely. At one point we will, once we get to it. It's really helpful. So jointhemajorityreport.com. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning tonight. Also, hey, Brandon, just to give you a heads up, bringing you on screen there. You're muted also, by the way. I'm not sure why. Yeah, Brandon, how about you let us know what's on the discourse?
Yes, yeah, you go first.
If you guys saw this, but there's a new episode of this show online called Surrounded. It's produced by this channel called Jubilee. And on Monday, we watched their latest video where some guy, Sam Seder.
The conservative, right?
The conservative commentator.
Yeah, who owned all of those social justice warriors, right? That guy.
He put on a real clinic with those SJWs. So we watched a lot of that. You can't watch it on my YouTube, but you can watch it on my Twitch, which has the exact same name as my YouTube channel. I'm diversified like that. And then yesterday we caught up on the whole tariff situation. I don't know if you saw, but Howard Lutnick was on CBS News with Nancy Cortez, and he did his best to sell the upcoming recession to his, fan of. I was going to say his fandom of like not too smart conservatives, but I don't think he did too great of a job. But yeah, check it out on the YouTube channel. Check it out on the Twitch. And that's what we were up to.
All right. check it out there. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning. This week we had Carl Baer on and Terrence Ray. Carl Baer talking about the Mahmoud Khalil stuff because I couldn't really talk about anything else. And also Ukraine. And also Terrence Ray, we talked about the invention of red and blue states and sort of how people think about that being flawed. So check that out at patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, guys, we'll head into the fun half now, and the number is 646-257-3920. We'll open up the phone lines on the other side of this. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the majority report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
Yeah, I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset?
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and...
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
wow.
Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
I had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job.
Tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Willy Wonka tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
That offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
Real thing.
That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Tour? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, Glenn.
Tour? Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Tour?
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the majority report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks doing great.
Now, shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best.
Violet tour?
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't bitch. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
sorry,
she wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
We are back, folks. Matt got us into the phones in the nick of time. Oh, maybe we're not. We're not. We're having a bit of an issue with the phone. Oh, wait, no, we're in. We'll see if... I'm going to open up the phone lines. Can people hear us on the phone lines? Just let us know. And yes, we keep forgetting to download the animation, but you still got the fun half song, so...
We have the file. I just got to convert it to something that can fit into OBS.
Human Phone Book said, Emma, did you see Porter entered the California governor's race? I did see that. You know, I like Katie Porter's politics. I do. Probably more than, you know, the average Democrat. Maybe I differ from Sam on this. I don't think she's, we have, there is Matt Binder. I don't know if she's the best politician, but I do, you know, if she's the only Democrat in the race, she would have a good shot. I just think that she's probably not going to be the only Democrat in the race, and someone with more name recognition like Kamala is going to run. And I would prefer her do that than try to run for president again, which I think would be a disaster. So, but, you know.
I generally agree. I mean, she's a okay progressive. I appreciate her calling out billionaire influence in primaries. She's going to have to extend that to AIPAC influence in primaries, and her taking a trip to Israel to talk about how BB is a partner with democracy in the year or two before October 7th. She's going to have to revise that position one way or the other, I think. And Binder, we don't have your mic yet, by the way.
There we go. That should fix it.
Yep. Yes. Hey, Binder, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
What's happening on your shows, huh?
Oh, we're on right now. I didn't realize.
Yes.
Check out Leftist Mafia tonight at youtube.com/Matt Binder.
All right. Check it out, folks. We'll read some IMs, then we'll do some clips. Northwest Car Hater. I called Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell to tell them to vote no and bully any other Dems who might be considering voting yes. They both have enough seniority that they should be throwing it around to pressure their caucus. They should. But Senate Democrats, federal Democrats in general, are just like completely consultant-brained. It's why we're seeing the best leadership from governors. I keep repeating this point because they actually have to govern, and they're not just like, you know, I mean, it's like the Roman Senate. They're not just like creatures of Washington that are, you know, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but you guys can picture it. I wanted to give up on that sentence. Dan from Windsor says, Laura Jane Grace from the band Against Me is ridiculing Tim Pool all over her social media right now. Binder knows who she is, guaranteed.
Oh, yes. Against Me, one of my all-time faves. Saw them for the first time at ABC No Rio in like 2002. They're great. So their singer, Laura Jane Grace, is a trans woman who came out well into the band's career. So, you know, so sure, some not so great people who thought they liked the band, but I just actually didn't pay attention to the lyrics, are no longer fans of theirs. And it appears that Tim Pool is one of those people.
Oh, really?
Is Binder is Against Me the band that has the song Prayer for the Refugee?
No, I don't think that's them.
Oh,
no.
That's Rise Against.
My bad.
I think
they are friends with Rise Against, and they toured with Rise Against, and I've actually seen them play together numerous times. But they're the one who had their big song was Pints of Guinness Make You Strong. They're a great band, and Laura Jane Grace has embarked on like a solo sort of career, and she opened up for one of Bernie's anti-oligarchy tours. I think one of the Wisconsin dates this past weekend. And she played one of her new songs that the right did not like. So Tim Pool has come out and attacked her over this song. And he's claiming to be like a former fan or was a fan or something like that. And so he's attacking her along with the rest of the right. But he's like using his like, I guess, old like fan bona fides to like make his attack mean more or something. And then it ended up like apparently he misunderstood the entire meaning of one of the songs that he brought up in his Against Me tirade, and she had to correct him or something like that.
That's funny.
It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny because these are the guys who were claiming that conservative is the new punk rock, and I would say, that Laura Jane Grace and Against Me are probably like the most influential punk bands that came out like in the 2000s. like they are up there. Like they are. It's impossible to say you're a fan of punk and not be aware of Against Me. If it's unbelievable that they're attacking her and claiming that they used to be punk or they are punk or that conservatism is the new punk rock.
We have a clip of Russell Brand talking about this, and I just think it's really rich.
Okay, go
He's
for
on
it.
his Christian tip about it, so here you go.
So here's Russell Brand, I guess, upset about the developments Binder just described.
God have a big fat dick, 'cause it feels like he's fucking me. Are his balls filled with lightning? Do they tingle like heaven's keys? Does your God have a big fat dick, 'cause it feels like he's fucking me?
Oh, that's blasphemy. And I'll tell you what bothers me about it is I can see the sort of excitement of that person, the perpetrator. Like, I can feel he's already pleased with himself. Like, yeah,
Okay,
I'm
wait,
singing
so-
and really tough.
He's misgendering her, right? Nice,
Yes,
dude.
Purposefully.
Didn't you, like, what, wasn't he the guy that was so edgy that he dressed up as Bin Laden the day after 9/11 for his radio show? And he was just like such a counterculture person that he didn't vote for Labor or for the Tories until...
You should go back to that. That's a pretty good bit.
He turned out for Labor.
He did?
Under Miliband and the Bin Laden thing. Yeah, that was part of his original lore back in the Bush administration. When I heard about him, I'm like, this crazy comedian. It turns out he did that less out of like a sort of stunt against imperialism or the coming war on terror, and more about him being jealous of all the attention that Osama bin Laden got after 9/11 and wanting it for himself.
That's hilarious, but I'm also just tickled by this guy who's a notorious sexual philanderer and now very credibly accused of non-consensual sexual acts by many different accusers, saying that the idea that you would say something like this is blasphemous.
This is blasphemy. He used to harass one of his producers who believed in God, calling him Nick the Vicar's son because his dad was a vicar. And those were actually very funny jokes.
Right.
I wonder if Russell repents for those every day
He
now.
should. Was that blasphemous, Russell? He's a pearl clutcher, but he's also a rosary clutcher now, I guess, apparently.
What were you going to say, Brian?
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, you can tell he's innocent of all those accusations because he's wearing a hoodie that says Jesus is king now. Oh, no, I'm sorry. A jumper for our UK friends.
I'm singing and really tough. I'm giving it to God, man, because I'm saying God's got a dick. God is the creator of all reality. God's not squeamish. When it comes to sort of taboos and guidance, it's not like you can't be, say, sort of promiscuous or profane. You can do all of those things. It's just you will suffer. And if you watch that again, you can see the suffering in that person just on the edge of eczema and just on the edge of a kind of a tautness. He's got a sort of a tautness coming through his skin. That's the first time I've ever seen that person. It might be the last. I don't know. Perhaps he'll go on to be an influential genius. But like what I think is that you can see vibrating out of that person a kind of a deep sadness and dissatisfaction.
I think So he posted this himself. That's interesting. I mean, you sound like you're having delusional thoughts. So
Right.
I'm not necessarily sure we should trust you.
He's projecting.
Yeah.
First of all, like it's funny he's like trying to like read Laura Jane Grace's like true feelings when actually like this is a musician with a band and a solo career who's been around for like I think this past week or a couple of weeks ago was like the 23-year anniversary of their debut album, Reinventing Axl Rose. And this is a band, she's the singer, and she has been very open over the years in all the songs about all the different things that she's gone through, from divorce, the first album that came out after she came out as trans was entirely about gendered dysphoria and her coming out as trans. Like, this is someone who's been very open about everything. So the fact that he's trying to like from afar gauge how she feels, literally just listen to her music.
Or like Wikipedia.
That's all you got to do. It just tells you everything.
I'm detecting a bit of emotion in this punk rock vocalist. Yeah, man, that's why everyone knows who they are. That's literally how they became known to the world, is expressing emotion through song. Well done. I mean, what's sad is how surface level this is. Like Russell Brand, when I saw him out in Long Island, Nassau Coliseum, about a decade ago. Interesting crowd, but we don't need to talk about that. He was doing interesting stuff, like opening the newspaper and just talking about like the different like the economy and breaking down articles and stuff like that. Now, it wasn't the most cutting edge analysis. It was okay for a comedian, though. It was nice to have a comedian say like the bankers are bad and the NHS is good. And now he can only comment on a person's like immediate looks. Like that's all what would Jesus think of that, Russ?
Yeah.
Would Jesus be like, the person has tight skin, in it?
And it's just his theology just feels also connected to some sort of mental illness or delusion
/ performance, which has always been the case with Russ.
Well, I mean, I don't know if he's a true believer. And so I think when you get these people who ultimately have just converted as a way to get out of accusations and to grift on an incredibly impressionable audience, they can't help but perform the kind of like, evangelical preacher type that like they have in their head from their time as being like, a famous atheist who looks down on those people ultimately. So I think he just can't help but like ultimately look and act like somebody who is patronizing his audience because he thinks they're probably stupid. Like they're stupid enough to fall for this.
He's trying the guru thing and like not selling it very well.
He found the easiest market with the dumbest hogs, frankly. Russell Brand does not believe in God. I do not think that. If he does believe in God, if you could look into his brain when he thinks of God, it would look exactly like Russell Brand today.
Yep.
If you could look into his brain, it would be full of parasites from when he got baptized in the Thames. That's what in his brain. It's like Swiss cheese.
All right.
It's really funny how much these guys like totally misunderstand stuff. That like total media illiteracy. Because one of the things Tim Pool was
can't understand art. Yeah.
One of the things Tim Pool was going after was how another one against me's big early songs was called "Baby, I'm an Anarchist," which was sort of like tongue in cheek. But he brought that up about how like, and now she's opening up for Bernie Sanders, which Bernie Sanders is not perfect, but out of all the politicians, pretty punk rock. But anyway. Against Me does have a song much later on called Teenage Anarchist, which discusses how their views have changed over the years. Like, this is just a guy who's like completely talking about Tim Pool now, just completely like trying to use this idea that he knows what he's talking about in something that, I guess he was a fan of when he was younger and just doesn't even know what the current position of that they have are. Like, it's the same thing you see with people who are like, rage for the machine now.
They don't realize they're the machine.
Yeah. Let's take a call really quickly. Calling from a 409 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 409.
Hi, this is Greg from Texas.
Greg from Texas. What's on your mind?
Did I see that the RAND Corporation is coming out with an update from, I think, their 2020 report on income distribution?
You may have seen it, and I may be behind on this. So let me know what does it say, or what are you trying to highlight?
Well, I don't know. I don't think the report. Did you ever read the 2020 report they did?
I can't remember.
Well, it's worth looking into, and I think it's still up on their website if you look to it. But just to kind of make it simple without going into a lot of details, they're talking about how the income has moved from the 90% to the 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you were making a salary of, like $50,000, had the income distribution been the same since like the time of Reagan, you'd be making about $90,000 this year. And they're going to update it to include, I think, to 2023. And I know that you're big on income inequality. I think that's a good place for you to start. But when it comes out, you really should consider having these people on.
Okay.
What's the general gist? Like, inequality is getting worse?
I don't know. The report, you mean the most recent report, the one coming out? I assume it has. At one time, they were talking about $2 trillion a year moving from the bottom 90 to the top 1%. And something like, I think they said on the 2020 report, it was around $60 trillion had moved since the time of Reagan to the top 1%. And maybe it's like up to 80,000 now or something. 80 trillion. Some huge number, which would tend to indicate maybe Rousseau was right.
All right. Well,
so in what sense was Rousseau right?
Oh, when the poor can't find food anymore, they'll eat the rich.
I mean, look, I'm not familiar with the Rand Institute studies personally. The truth is, we don't necessarily need any more information on the fact that there's a class war and nothing is affordable for anybody who works for a living. But
we'll check it out.
We'll look into it.
We'll look into I appreciate the call. Thank you. Okay. Let's take another quick one.